Nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes, and this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world, and then shall the end come.
Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dave Robbins with Time Ministries, and I thank you for joining me for Thursday's edition of End of the Age. Now, most of you will know, if you've studied prophecy at all, that prophecies foretell the merger of a world government and a world religious system in the end time. And in many ways, we're already seeing this being fulfilled with the establishment of the world government and the move back towards a world religion in many factors with the interfaith movements, the ecumenical movements. And on today's program, I'm going to discuss this prophesied union of politics and religion. But before I do that, I want to announce to you that every Thursday night at 7 p.m. Central Time, I have a Bible study that's live streamed on our Time Ministries Facebook page. And if you go to the Time Ministries Facebook page, 7 o'clock Central Time, I go through the prophecies of the Bible. I did one last Thursday. I taught on a whiteboard about the post-tribulation rapture. This week, tonight, I'm going to be starting Understanding the Bible, the End Time University series, Understanding the Bible, the first one. And every week at 7 o'clock, I'll take you through that. And we do an outline and a quiz and a lot of different things. So if you'd like to join me for that, I have a lot of people that join me from all over the world and watch that broadcast. And so just go to I'll live stream it. And it's at 7 o'clock Central Time at our End Time Ministries Facebook page. I think you'll enjoy it. We've got a lot of people. We have a lot of good times, a great conversation back and forth. So I got people all over the world watching it. So if you would like to join us, again, it's at our End Time Ministries Facebook page. I'll be live streaming 7 o'clock sharp Central Time. And I'd be happy to have you join me in that. So today's program, we're talking about the merger of politics and religion in the near future. The Bible prophesies it in many different ways, but there's going to be a world government established, and there's going to be a world religion established that supports or props up that world governing body. You say, well, how are they doing this right now? Well, let me read you something that came from the Jerusalem Post. And then I'll show you, as a result of this, how the world religious system is propping up this world government as we speak. The Bible prophesied about it 2,000 years ago, and yet we're seeing it happening in 2017. So the Jerusalem Post reports that recently in Jerusalem, an interfaith meeting was held to address climate change. You say, well, what does interfaithism have to do with global warming, the supposed global warming that leads to climate change? They had this big meeting just recently in Jerusalem where a lot of interfaith leaders got together to discuss climate change, which is the world governments, one of their ruses that they're using to scare everybody to bow down to their edicts of the one world government and how they're trying to globally govern everybody. It's called global warming, which leads to climate change. It's a hoax, but yet they're talking about it in every newspaper on the face of the planet. Why? Because it's their propaganda to get everybody scared of all these climate catastrophes that are going to come along. And the answer to that, in their mind, is to globally govern everybody, every aspect of your life. what you produce, what you consume, what kind of fuel you put in your car, everything. And so consequently, that's why it's kind of alarming that you would have interfaith movements or religious leaders gathering to discuss how they can help with the climate change issue. But it's all propaganda. Well, it's the merger. Remember, we're talking about the prophesied merger of politics and religion in the end time. Now, the article states that the leaders, these religious leaders, they found common ground at this meeting on the issues through their religions. On the issues of climate change, they found common ground through their religions. A rabbi, a priest, and a Muslim judge came together last Wednesday to discuss an issue equally affecting us all. According to them, climate change. Well, of course climate change affects us all. In Alaska right now, it's probably 30, 40 degrees. Whereas here in Dallas, it's about 102 degrees. So yeah, the climate's changing every day. That does affect us all. But man-made global warming, which leads to climate change, is a complete, utter hoax. So, the article goes on to say that the event, which was organized by the Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development and hosted by the Jerusalem Press Club, focused on the role of religious leaders. Now get this, is very important. Religious leaders increasing awareness of both climate change and the importance of the human obligation to take strides to preserve our shared planet. Now, well, let me go on a little bit and then I want to touch on a point. Rabbi David Rosen, along with the other religious leaders, said that this meeting sent a strong message of unity to what Rosen called the global village. Anytime you hear global village, global community, international community, think world government. They're trying to say, look, everybody's in this world together. There are no borders, this, that, and the other. Climate change, the climate affects us all. So this is a global village. And their answer to this is a global government that controls all of this. That's the thinking that's going on here. The three men, all esteemed figures within their faiths, cited a multitude of similarities among the Abrahamic religions that call their followers to prioritize the health of our earth. The Interfaith Center for Sustainable Development is an Israeli nonprofit organization that works to catalyze a transition to sustainable, thriving, and spiritually aware society through the leadership of faith communities. Its founder and director, Rabbi Nerol, introduced the discussion by referencing current affairs, noting that the Jerusalem area has suffered violence almost every summer since the year 2000, and that simultaneously the region has experienced its most severe drought in 900 years, not to mention intense prolonged heat. So in other words, and then he says, pretty much as a result, there is an undeniable correlation between rising temperatures and the incitement of violence. So he's saying as a result of global warming, climate change, there's been a close correlation with the incitement of violence as a result of that. Don't really understand that, but let's move on. From a religious perspective, this isn't a crisis of nature. This is a crisis of the human being. The panelists were each asked to share a teaching from their faiths that lends itself to the need to address climate change. So from the Christian perspective, they're thinking that we're part of all of creation, so that we have to take care of our common home. This is a big term that's going around now in the Pope's encyclical that he put out on climate change, a lot of different things. They're saying this is our common home and we have to protect it. Now, this is a key statement. It says we have to take care of our brothers and sisters. So they're calling, in the Pope's encyclical, he called the sun, the moon, the earth, different things, our brothers and sisters, like we were not, that we're all part of one another, and that we shouldn't, some people, they actually don't think we should cut down trees and all this other things because they believe we're harming, if you tear down the forest, you're hurting one of our brothers. Now, it actually goes that far, believe me. Read the opening paragraphs of the Pope's recent encyclical put out in 2015. Rosen, who is a vegan, cited an injunction from Deuteronomy that says, choose life in order that you and your children shall live. Now remember, they're talking about climate change. And he interpreted this Torah passage in a modern context. He said, that's what happened in Deuteronomy, but today we would say climate change is a matter of life and death. Now remember, climate change, global warming, which leads to climate change, human-induced global warming, it's a hoax. It's put out by the United Nations and the world government in the earth today in order to get everybody scared enough to where they would say, hey, there's just such as huge catastrophes, climate catastrophes that are going to come on the earth that we need to, as a world governing body, usurp authority over you and your sovereignty and govern you. That's what the Sustainable Development Goals are all about. And so, but yet here you have religious leaders that are saying, hey, global warming, which leads to climate change, is a matter of life and death. Well, imagine the people that these religious leaders have influence over. Imagine what they're thinking when they see their religious leaders stand up, some very influential religious leaders, and say, global warming, which leads to climate change, is a matter of life and death. Can you see how much influence they would have over their individuals in leading them to prop up this propaganda or to support the propaganda of the world government? One of the guys, Patton, introduced a chilling idea about forced migration due to global warming. He actually cited, and I'll get into this before the end of the program, he actually, if I should have time to do that, he actually cited, he went back to Pope Francis, who said in his encyclical, in our day, there are not only refugees because of war, there are refugees because of climate change. Now, these types of interfaith meetings on climate change, they're cropping up everywhere. This isn't the first one that's ever been held. In May, they had an interfaith conference strictly devoted to Laudato Si, which was the Pope's encyclical put out in 2015. 2 years later, they had a conference specifically devoted to this encyclical and how we could implement some of the Sustainable Development Goals to support that, the supposed crisis that's coming, or that we're under, they say now, and it was held at the Rome's Lay Center. This was in May. In November of 2016, interfaith leaders from 50 countries signed a climate statement in Morocco to hammer out details of the then just signed Paris Climate Agreement in 2015, which Donald Trump just pulled the United States out of, which was an spectacular move because it's a complete hoax in a shift towards implementation and action on climate and sustainable development. So you've got these huge interfaith movements that are meeting religious leaders that have influence over millions of people, and they're meeting to sign documents on how they can stamp out ways to help further the climate change sustainable development agenda of the United Nations. It's a merger. We're watching it happen on several levels. But one of the ways they're doing it is they're merging, trying to prop up the global government propaganda of global warming and climate change. We're watching it happening. But everybody's focused on something that the fake news media is trying to plant on Trump, the Russians and this, that, and the other. Everybody gets focused on that stuff, and there are huge things happening right out in the very open, and we're not catching it. So the Bible prophesies, two of the main prophecies just prior to the second coming will be a world government, a world religion, and that they will merge, they will team up together. The world religion will support this, lend the support of its religious following to this world governing body. That's happening as we speak. But yet a lot of people are missing it because they're focused on these other little minutiae that's going on. That means it doesn't mean a hill of beans. And they're missing the big picture of things that are being heaped on them. And so what I want to do today is to make sure you understand that these things are happening as we speak. We're living in the end time, and these interfaith movements these interfaith meetings dealing with climate change and pushing the Sustainable Development Goals. That's the merger that was talked about in Scripture. It's part of the merger. There's also a gathering back together of churches and things like that. I won't get into that today, but this is part of that merger where religious movements are asking the ones that they influence to prop up. Because if these religious leaders buy into it, all they've got to do is turn to the people that they're over and say, "Hey, look what we signed. Now we've all got to help implement these Sustainable Development Goals." And you see how they're propping up the world government. Also, in 2016, Pope Francis participated in an event, the concluding events of a 3-day interreligious conference in Italy that drew more than 450 Jewish, Muslim, Christian, and other religious leaders from all around the world. It was a huge interfaith meeting, and they discussed a wide range of issues, including climate change and how can we further the Sustainable Development Goals pushed by the United Nations or the world government. And there have been many other interfaith movements or interfaith meetings geared towards climate change. So what am I talking about today? I'm talking about the merger of politics and religions, the merger of the world government and the world religion in the end time, the prophesied union of the end time world government and the end time world religion. So you say, well, man, these leaders of the world, these globalists, people are international liberalists, they're not really focused on this. They're just trying to help the planet. No. They are making huge moves towards a global government. Robert Mueller, the former Assistant Secretary General at the UN, stated this, and I quote, "We have brought the world together as far as we can politically. But to bring about a true world government, the world must be brought together spiritually. We need a United Nations of religions." Robert Mueller understood completely that the ultimate goal of internationalists around the globe is a totally implemented world governing system, an organization really designed to supersede any national government and demand that all nations surrender their sovereignty and submit to international laws and regulations. Mr. Mueller also knew that for this dream to become a reality, all religions must somehow ignore their differences, unify, and pledge their allegiance to the establishment of the global community. Because you're trying to set up a world government, and you got priests, and you got rabbis, and you got all these different preachers, ministers, religious leaders that control the thought processes or the allegiance of their flocks. They look to these leaders for guidance. And he realized if we don't have all them on board, we're only going to be able to bring this world government so far. And so he stated when this happens, and we know that when this happens, and according to the Bible, that this merger of religion and politics is going to happen, that according to Bible prophecy, it's going to happen in the future, and that those who choose not to conform, they're going to be considered heretics or possibly even pay for it with their lives. They're going to be considered extremists, religious extremists. I've already heard that term used by people who are trying to get the religions united and said, hey, if you're not involved in this, you're a religious extremist or a religious terrorist or a religious racist. I've actually heard those terms used by these people. And this is exactly what the Bible says is going to happen in the near future. We're watching it happen right before our very eyes. There are hundreds of articles on this stuff. And yet people think, well, I'm going to get caught up in this. Did the Russians affect the outcome of the election in the United States? Let's get all focused on that minutia. And yet all of these things are happening behind the scene. It's almost like the Wizard of Oz where you're seeing the green head, but yet don't look at the guy behind the curtain where the stuff's really going on. And so you really need to understand the prophecies of the Bible. It's so critical. So that way when these current events are happening, you're not taken by like a tidal wave when it finally hits home. So Where's the prophecy? Well, Revelation 13 prophesies that just this kind of a world government system will be established and ruled by the Antichrist. Revelation 13 also, the very same chapter, foretells of a world religion and a global economic system that will be used to enforce the edicts of the Antichrist and cause the entire world to pledge allegiance to his global authoritarian system. We're watching it happen already. And we are in many ways, that's what these interfaith movements are, talking about climate change, implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. And they're saying, well, hey, the trees, the planet, it's all our brothers and sisters. And if we harm them, we're going against what our religion, our religious teachings tell us to do. Really? So we are in many ways, they're saying, we're in many ways already functioning under the tentacles of an ever-encroaching global governing system. It's being implemented in many ways. The Sustainable Development Goals is just one way. And have you ever heard of the World Health Organization, the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, the United Nations? I mean, there are a plethora of organizations that are specifically designed to govern the planet as a whole. And so what we're watching, we're watching this happen right before our very eyes. We don't have to really guess about it. So one of the things, one of the interfaith movements that happened recently was devoted to the Pope's encyclical and how he was talking about that he believed in global warming, which leads to climate change, and was talking about all of the different ways that it would affect us, that if the planet continued to warm, that we would have the sea levels would rise, and that potentially millions of people would be displaced because they would be the sea would come in and overtake cities, coastal cities, and that there's going to be more tornadoes, more hurricanes, all kinds of stuff. It was in the Pope's encyclical that he wrote in 2015. Well, there was a huge interfaith meeting just in May devoted to going over this encyclical and saying, look, here's what the Pope said, here's what we need to do to implement the Sustainable Development Goals, or the process of global government in the earth. They were propping this up as a result of the Pope's encyclical. So I'm going to be talking about that today because it's very important. Because as a result of what the encyclical, all of the climate catastrophes, the Pope actually called for a global political authority or a world government to oversee this. That was his solution. That, hey, humans can't control themselves, so there needs to be a world government that tells them what to do, these Sustainable Development Goals and different things. And I'm going to read that here in just a second. So, as a result of let's talk about the Pope's encyclical and the results of the global warming climate change propaganda. Because all it's really basically supposed to do is to instill fear in people. And once you get afraid enough, if I can get you scared enough about something, then you'll pretty much in the name of security, you'll pretty much let me do whatever I need to do. If I told you, hey, something's going to happen, and if I handcuff you, it won't happen. If I can get you scared enough and get you to believe, you'll let me put handcuffs on you. So that's the thing. It's fear. It's the fear factor. If I can get you scared enough, then you'll allow me to do. In times of crisis, people will allow you to do pretty much whatever. Hey, leave your house and go stand in the creek. And people will just walk over there and stand in the creek because they think, I'm scared. So really these guys use fear. Fear is really an emotion caused by the threat of danger. And really for thousands of years, fear has been used by a plethora of leaders, of pharaohs, kings, monarchs, emperors, caliphates, presidents, politicians, and even religious leaders to enslave the populace. Over time, the process has been refined, but the objective has never changed. It's all about control. If I can get you scared enough, then I can control you. And that's what the global warming, climate change hoax is all about. Getting people scared enough so they will accept the edicts of the world governing body. Do your research. That at the end of the day, when you peel back all the layers of the onion, that's what global warming, climate change is all about. There's a huge agenda to push a world government on the population of the globe, and they know they need to get people scared enough to allow them to implement that. And so that's why, you wonder why they scream so much at Donald Trump, because he doesn't want to play ball with their world government and the establishment, and he wants to pull us out of the Paris Climate Agreement rather than leave us in and have us bow down to its edicts. The globalist and liberal internationalists that believe in a world government, they despise Donald Trump because he's trying to pull us out of all that. You really want to know what's going on here? In essence, that's what's going on. He's not going to play ball with them, and they do not like that. He's not going to move along with this merger into a world governing body. He said in America, we don't worship government, we worship God. And they don't like to hear that. They want you to worship government. That's going to be the Antichrist goal in the end time, to get you to pledge allegiance to Him and His one world governing body. And so when an individual stands up that says, "Nah, I'm not going to do that," they cannot stand that. So what do? They come against him every way they can. He can raise his eyebrow and they'll say something dramatic happened and the Russians must have caused that. You see what I'm saying? And because they don't like his politics. They don't like him going against the establishment and the world government. So when we get back, I'll talk about a little of the fear tactics that are being used today, really in this merger between politics and religion, or this one world government and this world religious system, because they're having huge interfaith meetings as we speak to promote this very agenda right now.
On December 23, 2016, the United Nations passed a resolution that will lead the world into the Battle of Armageddon. Every person on earth should watch. First step to Armageddon. Irvin explains exactly what happened on December 23, 2016, and illustrates why the events of that day will ultimately culminate into the final battle described in the book of Revelation. Call 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463. Or go to endtime.com and order yours today. The world's greatest revival is just ahead. How far are we from the Battle of Armageddon, and what will happen between now and then? The prophecies of the Bible clearly foretell of major events that will come to pass over the next few years. God did not intend for His people to stumble blindly through the end times. Irvin Baxter covers the final 7 years with the timeline of events. Sixth trumpet war, Israel's third temple, the Antichrist, 666, and the world's greatest revival just ahead. From Here to Armageddon gives the location of the prophecy, explains what it means, and shows how world conditions are presently converging for the fulfillment of prophecy. These cutting-edge teachings will open eyes to understanding like never before. Order your From Here to Armageddon 8-lesson series right now. Call 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463. Or go to endtime.com. Order yours today.
If your station only carries the first 30 minutes of End of the Age, go to endtime.com and click the Watch button to continue today's broadcast. You can also finish up later by clicking the Archives button.
So I'm talking today about the merger of the world religion, the world and the world government in the end time, the prophesied merger of this political religious system. We're watching it happening in many ways. Now, the leaders of these entities believe, they understand that people have to get in fear mode. If we come along and it's just a normal time, and they say, hey, you guys need to take on the edicts of the world government, everybody says, nah, we're doing pretty good. Yeah, I don't want to do that. There's no problems. I mean, everything's cool. We don't really have to mess with that. But yet, if a world religious leader comes along and a world political leader, or these systems that they represent, and they say, oh, the humans are caught because of the carbon emissions that they're putting off, they're causing the planet to heat up to a boiling point. And as a result, the climate is changing and there's more tornadoes, there's more hurricanes, the sea levels are rising to the point where it's going to displace humans and all these different things. Then everybody starts to get afraid. And the more afraid they get, the more they're willing to yield up sovereignty in the name of security to take on the edicts of this world governing body. Now that's what's happening. If you do your research, you follow the news, you see what I'm saying is true. The Sustainable Development Goals are the agenda put out by the United Nations to govern the planet. It's a blueprint for global governance. Look at the Sustainable Development Goals. You can see there's 17 of them. It's very, very, very important that you understand what's going on, the big picture. And so none of this is going to be talked about on the nightly news tonight, I promise you. You were not taught this in high school. But this is something you need to know about because it will affect every person on the planet before this is over with. That's the goal. And so in a recent, before I get into the encyclical, let me make sure that you understand the global warming, which leads to climate change, is a hoax. The planet has heated up and cooled down since God created it. And it's just cycles. The earth has a way of heating itself up, cooling itself down. Most of it's done by the oceans. And most of the heat comes from the sun, not from human-induced global warming from carbon emissions and things like that. That's all comes from bought and paid for climate scientists. And so that's just propaganda. I want to make sure you get that. Now, there are several ways I could prove that. One of the most recent ones I've seen today in the news is that for years, Al Gore and a bunch of different people, Al Gore had his Inconvenient Truth movie over 10 years ago. And in that, he scared the living daylights out of people by saying that, because of the earth is warming, that the Arctic ice is going to melt and that the sea levels are going to rise by almost 20 feet. Just think about that, 20 feet, the sea level. And that it would engulf many coastal cities and that people would have to move from their homes and that life as we know it is going to be over. This was over 10 years ago. I think the movie came out in 2006. So we're about 11 years removed from that. And yet, I found an article today, I think it may have come out either today or yesterday, where they said that the sea levels have actually declined over the last couple years. That they went through, NASA has sea level charts that they check, and that over the last 24 years that it has, on average, it's risen, the sea level has risen about the thickness of a dime and a nickel stacked on top of each other. Just very, very minimal. But over the last, in 2016, 2017, it's actually declined a little bit. So you see what I'm saying is that this propaganda is being pushed, but yet it's not really happening. Guess who controls the climate? It's not you and it's not me. Even though I drive a Ford F-150 and you may drive a huge SUV, we don't control the climate. God controls the climate. What these people are trying to do, the world government is humanistic. They've removed God out of the picture. They don't even mention God ever. It's that humans are doing this and we need humans to usurp authority over them, to control them and bow down to our edicts, and that's what needs to happen. And we'll get the religious leaders on board. Think about the religious leaders getting on board. Imagine if your pastor, who you look to for leadership and guidance, stands in the pulpit and says, hey, this global warming and climate change is real. And we are going to start implementing the Sustainable Development Goals in our church. In our families, we're going to be sustainable and we're going to start implementing those to the best of our ability. You would say, well, I mean, we trust the guy, and so we're going to start the process of implementing these sustainable development goals in our church community. Well, that's what's being done on an international level. With these interfaith movements, the religious leaders of all of these churches and the mosques and different, wherever these people meet, they're going to these interfaith movements and they're buying into these sustainable development goals and climate change and global warming. They're buying into that. And then they're coming back to their flocks and saying, here's what we just signed, here's what we're going to do. In essence, the interfaith movement is one of the efforts that's being done to start this world religious system. Interfaithism and ecumenism. Those are the two main efforts. And they're buying into this. And in doing so, they're propping up the world governing body. And that's exactly what the Bible says is going to happen in the end time. That there's going to be a merger of politics and religion, a global government and a global religious system. And now I want to get into the Pope's encyclical. It's very, very important because he's obviously the most recognized religious leader on the planet. And he's bought into this lock, stock, and barrel. And he's promoting this world governing system. In his encyclical, he actually calls for a global political authority to oversee all of this. And he gave this encyclical come out in, I think, June of 2015, just a few months prior to when the Sustainable Development Goals were agreed upon unanimously by all the nations of the earth in September of 2015. And then in December of 2015 is when the Paris Climate Agreement was signed. So it was all kind of like pre-planned right there. And the encyclical, they just had a huge interfaith meeting just in May to make sure they went over the encyclical and go over the fear factor that was spun in that to get everybody to buy into that. Again, so what it was, they talked about climate change. So you say, well, what's an encyclical? Well, an encyclical by a pope is normally sent to a particular set of Catholic bishops. However, Pope Francis stated in this particular encyclical that now that we are faced as we are with the global environmental deterioration, he's talking about global warming, which leads to climate change. He states, I wish to address every person living on the planet. So it's not just sent out to bishops or archbishops or cardinals. This is addressed to every person on the planet, whether you're a Catholic or Buddhist or whatever you believe. And according to Pope Francis, now this is all in the encyclical. You can read it for yourself. I've read it many times. It's like 176 pages, or if I remember right. It's been a while since I've read it. But it was just like an ungodly amount of words. And according to Pope Francis, that human-induced global warming is causing the global environment deterioration, which leads to climate change. And he stated this, and I'll quote from the encyclical, a very solid scientific consensus indicates that we are presently witnessing a disturbing warming of the climatic system. Now, that's been disproven. I know the claim's been made that 97% of scientists agree in man-made global warming, which leads to climate change. Okay, that's actually not true at all. I've got research from many scientists, many books and I'm talking about scientists leading in this field, not the International Panel on Climate Change, not the IPCC, who are bought and paid for, those scientists by the United Nations. I'm talking about normal, truthful scientists that are leading in their field, and they've said that that's not even close to being true. But the Pope goes on to say that a number of scientific studies indicate that most global warming in recent decades is due to the great concentration of greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrogen oxides, and others. Here it is, released mainly as a result of human activity through coal-fired plants and through the driving of your SUVs and I'll say I'm a Ford guy, so Ford F-150 pickups and big, huge cars with big V8 engines. That's what he's saying is creating this climate catastrophe. Humans are causing this to happen. We're causing, get this, the climate of the world, the earth, the planet, to heat up because of the carbon emissions that we put off. And then he states, if present trends continue, this century may well witness extraordinary climate change. And now this was back in 2015. And he said this century could witness extraordinary climate change and unprecedented destruction of ecosystems with serious consequences for us all. Here it is. A rise in sea level, for example. Now, I just proved to you that NASA, through NASA, the sea level charts, it's actually decreasing a little bit over the last couple of years. And that, but the Pope has said a rise in sea level can create extreme serious situations. If we consider that a quarter of the world's population lives on the coast or nearby, and that the majority of our megacities are situated on coastal areas. So what's happening here? People living in a coastal area, they start to go, oh, whoa, now hold on a minute. He's talking about me. And they start to think, is this stuff really real? Am I going to have to move? There starts to become a fear factor here. Because you have one of the most powerful religious figures in the world that's making this claim. It's in the Pope's encyclical. And so he goes on to say that climate change is a global problem with grave implications. Environmental, social, economic, political, and for the distribution of goods. It represents one of the principal challenges facing humanity in our day. Now, that is the crisis. There's a lot more to it. I just picked the highlights of it, but that's the crisis in essence that is being put forth in the Pope's encyclical that was put out in June of 2015. Now, to say that, Pope Francis has brought into the environmental catastrophe fear-mongering. He bought into the fear-mongering tactics of the global elite. And obviously, the encyclical proceeds to expound on, in great detail, the impact that this crisis will have on the earth and the inhabitants thereof. Now, I've got to remind you that global warming and climate change, the forecast being sold to us by the news media and by, I should say, the fake news media, the United Nations, and now by these religious leaders in these interfaith movements, it's simply not happening. And so when we get back from I know we're coming up to a break. When we get back from the break, we'll continue on talking about the merger that's happening right now between politics and religion, the world government and the world religious system in the end time.
Most people have dreamed of someday walking on the ground where Jesus walked over 2,000 years ago. You don't have to wait any longer. Make this the year for your life-changing experience. This is your official invitation to join Judy and me for our 2017 Fall End Time Prophecy Tour. The trip of a lifetime is a severe understatement. If you could travel to any place on earth, your first choice should definitely be the Holy Land. There is simply no other place like it. Call 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463 for more information. Ask to speak to Holly or Jana about the tour.
So even though it's easily proven that global warming, human-induced global warming, which leads to climate change, is a hoax, internationalists view global warming and climate change as the perfect scheme because every time a hurricane, a flood, a heat wave, polar vortex, or some other climate catastrophe occurs, it can be blamed on the unstable environment, and it scares people. And so it is a perpetual crisis. It's never ending. Climate change. Climate is, it's 102 today in Dallas. I think in this weekend it's going to get down to like 92. So the climate just changed. It's changed every day since God created the earth. And so consequently, this is a perpetual crisis. Everything that happens, they can blame on this. And it can be used to keep really the citizens of the world in a constant state of fear. Now, do you remember when Rahm Emanuel said, you never want a serious crisis to go to waste? And he said, what I mean by that is an opportunity to do things that you didn't think you could do before. When everything's going smooth, everybody's like, no, I'm not buying into that. But if you can get them scared enough, they'll let you do pretty much almost whatever you want if they're scared enough. Now, and that's why we like to come and say, no, hold on, everybody, this is a hoax. Now, with this in mind, one has to ask, why the crisis? Why? Why are they trying to scare everybody? Well, after reading the encyclical in its entirety, the answer became really crystal clear in my mind, and in a lot of other people's minds that read the encyclical, because before it's over with, the Pope asked for a global political authority to govern all of this, and that we need to bow down to the edicts of these sustainable development goals. And that's really found in the proposed solution to the encyclical, to this imaginary problem. Now, let's talk about world government, because we're talking about a world religious system and a world government. How is this being spun as a result of the encyclical? Remember, there's been huge interfaith meetings just within the past few months on how, let's talk about the climate change and what the Pope said in the encyclical. It just happened in May in Rome. So, world government, the concept is that humans cannot or will not manage themselves. Therefore, they must be governed by a select group or of more, let's say, disciplined or better educated humans, i.e. globalist or internationalist. That's what they think. And since the supposed global warming and climate change hoax is affecting the entire planet, then a global management solution is mandatory to regulate every aspect of their life for each and every person. In the encyclical, Pope Francis advocated, really in more ways than one, just such a global governing system in order to save the planet from the supposed disfigurement of the destruction of creation. Now, I'm going to go over, I think I'll have time to go over two. If not, I did number one, which to me was the most important, because we're talking about the Sustainable Development Goals. If you don't understand what the Sustainable Development Goals are, you need to do your research on that, because they're going to try to govern every aspect of your life and my life, all the way down into our localities. I don't care if you have a city of 1,000 people. They're going to try to tell you what to do with your land and how much you consume, what you produce, the electricity you use, everything. Because they're saying, hey, these developed nations, the United States, they use too much. And so they're consuming too many goods. So we need to restrict them. And they have too much. So the United Nations is socialistic. And they believe in wealth redistribution. So the United States has too much as a developed nation. So we need to regulate what they're using and funnel some of their massive amounts of wealth to these underdeveloped nations, because we don't want to have the haves and the have-nots. So we need to equal the playing field. That's what this is all about. So, sustainable development. That's one of the ways that the Pope called for in his encyclical to solve this problem of global warming, which leads to climate change. He said the urgent challenge to protect our common home, which he's saying that he believes that the planet, us, everything is brothers and sisters, literally, and that it includes he stated that our common home includes a concern to bring the whole family, the whole human family, together to seek a sustainable and integral development. He states that the Conference of the United Nations on Sustainable Development, the Rio +20, issued a wide-ranging but ineffectual outcome document. International negotiations cannot make significant progress due to the positions taken by different countries which place their national interest above the global common good or the world government. That's what this is all boiling down to. And he would be opposed to a Donald Trump who would say, nah, I'm for America, not for the world government. We signed a declaration of independence, not interdependence. So you say sustainable development, what's that? Well, the term sustainable development or the sustainable development principles are referred to 21 times in the encyclical. So the Pope knows very well what the sustainable agenda is. But the ultimate outcome of this sustainability agenda by the United Nations is a massive transformation of the social, political, technological, cultural, and behavioral processes that impact how mankind produces and consumes every aspect of your life. In other words, sustainability affects every aspect of every person on earth. Green initiatives attempt to modify human behavior to reward us for how we eat, how we work, travel. You're using too much gas. We need to put everybody on these electric trams and get everybody to drive to one spot, park, and then take this train to work. It's called sustainability. And we want to get everybody to be more sustainable. Sustainable development. When you think about that, you've heard the term, it's all, if you follow the news at all, you've heard the term sustainable development. Well, when you think about it, all sustainable development is a catchphrase that's used by activists and government agencies involved in the implementation of Agenda 21 and the Agenda 2030, which, according to the UN's own website, is a comprehensive plan of action to be taken globally, nationally, and locally in your town. You say, well, man, the United Nations, that's up in New York. Most of their inner workings of that organization is in Europe, and they're not going to affect me in Wiley, Texas, where I live. Well, no, absolutely they are going to. If I guarantee you, I could go to the town council or the building inspectors and different things, and they have some aspect of the sustainable development processes already there. So it's a global action. The United Nations own website says it's a global action taken nationally, locally, and globally by organizations, get this, of the United Nations system, governments, and major groups in every area which humans impact the environment. Where you could put a pond on your property, where the building fences, property lines, all this other stuff. Can you cut all these trees down? This, that, and the other. That's where they're wanting to get to. Every aspect where you impact the environment. The amount of electricity you use. Everything. So the ultimate goal of Agenda 21 or Agenda 2030 or all these different agendas is the control by the United Nations of a future one world government of all human settlements, determining where you can live, what your land should be used for, every aspect. And when you hear sustainable development, it's not a good thing. It equals world government policies really to control the citizens of the world. Now, the second way that the Pope talked about in his encyclical to control this catastrophe was the Earth Charter. The Earth Charter asks us to leave behind a period of self-destruction and make a new start. But we've not yet as developed the universal awareness needed to achieve this. So the Pope said, here I would like to echo the courageous challenge as never before in history. Common destiny beckons us to seek a new beginning. Well, not surprisingly, Pope Francis made an explicit reference to the Earth Charter, which was envisioned by its founders as a global governing, really a 10 commandments, if you will, managing the production and consumption of all humans. And you say, well, Dave, wow, this is a little far out there. Go read the Pope's encyclical that he put out in 2015. You'll see exactly what I'm saying is true. And in many ways, the encyclical mirrors the principles of the original Earth Charter, calling for the protections of the Earth's ecological system while advocating social and economic justice. Both of these happen to be socialistic doctrines. And this is important for us to know, since the Bible prophesies the future one world government will be a socialistic entity. Now, some might be asking, well, who could possibly manage the production and consumption of every human along with the water, the soil, the forest, all the marine life on earth, and ensure universal health care and much more? Well, they're already endeavoring to do that. The United Nations, of course, the UN, was designed to ultimately become a one world government when it was created back in 1945. And so the Earth Charter itself states, in order to build a sustainable global community, the nations of the world must renew their commitment to the United Nations and fulfill their obligations under existing international agreements and support the implementation of the Earth Charter principles with an international legally binding instrument of environment and development. So, sounds like a call for a global governing entity, doesn't it? It really is a total reliance on the United Nations as the world management system, the new beginning that Pope Francis was referring to in his encyclical. And then the last one I want to cover was the Pope's call for a global political authority to govern all of this. There are efforts to govern the oceans and the seas, to be put under a global management system, the forest of the planet. I mean, every aspect. The Sustainable Development Goals, you've got to study them. We've written several articles in End Time Magazine on the Sustainable Development Goals and what they're all about. It's very important because this is the United Nations, one of the United Nations efforts towards governing the planet. Now you can see, with all of the efforts by the religious, this interfaith movements to talk about global warming and climate change, they're having interfaith meetings, huge interfaith meetings, to talk about global warming, which leads to climate change. You say, well, what's it all about? It's about the end time, the prophesied end time merger of the world government and the world religion. The Bible specifically says that the world religion will be established to bring all of its followers into obeisance to this world governing body. And listen, folks, we're in the end time because we're watching this happen as we speak.
End of the Age is a production of End Time Ministries. This broadcast will be available on our website, endtime.com, in the archives section. On our website, you'll also find more information about how current events are fulfilling Bible prophecy. To reach our operators, call 1-800-END-TIME. That's 1-800-363-8463. End Time Ministries is partner supported. We would like to say thank you to our partners who made this broadcast possible. To do what Matthew 24:14 said, to reach the world with the gospel of the kingdom.